Hello, my name is Mason Cipollini, joined by Colin and Leif. This is Lab 9 for OPTI 471B.
A shack cube is a common path interferometer. It is essentially a beam splitter with a cemented plano-convex lens, where the reference and TED surfaces are arranged in a 2F2F configuration. Let's walk through the figure. First, the instant light is focused onto the entrance face of the shack cube. The beam then diverges, and part of the light reflects upward by 90 degrees toward the reference and TED surfaces. The light passes through the AR-coated top face of the beam splitter. Some of it reflects from the reference surface, while some transmits to the TED surface, introducing optical path difference. Because the system is in a 2F2F configuration, light reflected from the reference surface focuses at the exit face, and the same is true for the light from the test surface. The two beams then recombine at the exit face and form an interferogram that is viewed on the detector. Shack cube interferometers are remarkable for their ruggedness and compactness. They are much smaller compared to other larger interferometers such as a Mach-Zehnder or Michelson, while also having the benefits of a shared path. The shared path helps to combat errors stemming from differing vibration in the reference and test path. Beyond this, they are also easier to align than typical interferometer. Compared to a shear plate, a shack cube can be used as a true wavefront error testing interferometer. Whereas a shear plate interferes an incoming wavefront with a slightly displaced copy of itself, a shack cube uses a Fizeau-like configuration to measure wavefront error relative to a reference surface. This is the fundamental difference. Shack cubes are simple, robust tools that can be used for optical surface testing and wavefront testing, while a shear plate is better suited to beam quality inspection, particularly collimation testing.
When using the shack cube, it is important to know the aberrations. Defocus will show many circular fringes, with spherical aberration being much similar, while tilt will simply be an array of straight lines. Combinations will either shift or broaden the fringes. When coma is present, it will look like an opening in the fringes seen in tilt. Combining these three fringes will offer some fairly indescribable results. With astigmatism, it depends on the focus whether the fringes will appear to open vertically, horizontally, or like an X. Combining this with tilt gives some shifted and or curved patterns. Now start the lab by aligning the microscope objective to the spatial filter so that it comes into focus at the input face. Place the long focal length test mirror at the cemented lens face and align with the shack cube such that it coincides with the lens curvature. View the output on the camera software to verify the interferogram. Null the fringes by carefully adjusting the mirror tilts until most aberrations are gone. To test, first slowly add defocus in and out of best focus and record the fringe count, spacing, and radius at each increment. Return to best focus and repeat with both vertical and horizontal tilt, as well as horizontal tilt with slight defocus. Lastly, repeat all tests instead with the short focal length test mirror.
First, we look at the null and defocus of the low-power reference mirror. At null, while there are some slight variations in the wavefront, we can't see any obvious fringe patterns with zero fringes. This null occurs when the center of curvature of the mirror is in the same position as the center of curvature of the plano-convex lens cemented with the shack cube. As we move in or outside focus, we see an increasing concentric fringe pattern typical of defocus. We can also see that the tilt is not perfectly zeroed, as the center of the pattern is not in the center of the aperture. Moving back to best focus and then adding tilt in X and Y, we see mostly linear fringes develop along their respective axes, showing the linear wavefront error function, with fringe density proportional to the amount of tilt. We can see some slight concentricity of the fringes due to residual defocus, and the fringes aren't perfectly aligned to their axes due to tilt in the opposite axis. As we add tilt to a defocused mirror, we can see the center of the defocus pattern is shifted away from the center with increasing tilt. The amount this pattern travels is reduced with higher amounts of defocus. Compared to an ideal result, we again have some slight axis mismatch in the tilt. Moving on to the high-power test mirror, again we see a pretty good null with about one fringe or less of residual, and it is hard to tell what is present. As we move in and out of focus, we get the same concentric pattern behavior, however the fringes appear slightly elliptical due to either some coma or astigmatism present in the system. Also, there is some tilt shown as an offset of the fringe pattern. In the simulated data, we don't see these residual aberrations. Returning to best focus and looking at tilt, we see mostly linear fringe patterns as before. There is again some residual defocus, however in the low Y tilt, we can see a pretty significant difference from pure tilt, potentially coma. Overall, the fringe patterns in the simulation are similar, but without the stray aberrations. Lastly, we look at defocus and tilt and find the same results as with the test mirror. For larger defocus, more tilt is needed to move the center of the pattern the same distance. Again, we see the ellipticity of the defocus fringes, otherwise the test data follows the patterns of the simulated data.
For the quantitative analysis, we decided to analyze the sample interferogram given in the lab procedures, shown here. To analyze the interferogram, we took a center cut in X and Y, marking location and fringe order of every dark fringe with the fringe order peaking at the center. To analyze the interferogram, we took a center cut in X and Y, marking location and fringe order of every dark fringe with the fringe order peaking at the center. To verify our results, we plugged these coefficients into the Wolfram wavefront error visualizer. As you can see, the two wavefronts are nearly identical.